It's definitely a pleasure to be here and to offer some thoughts on how we should go about this task, trying to define the term Métis peoples in the Constitution. I'm going to take a rather legalistic kind of interpretive perspective, and in a sense, Harry, I'm actually going to open up that can of worms, I think, and explore how we should think about defining Métis in the Constitution. Just in terms of an overview, I am preparing a paper, but I wasn't able to get it done for today. And this is more like the overview of the paper, defining the Métis people, the whole debate of choosing between a broad and narrow definition, some of the options that we should explore in doing that. And when you interpret a constitution, one of the important things is to also see how the terms relate to the other important and essential terms in the Constitution. So of necessity, I'll be looking at defining peoples and defining Aboriginal as well. Hey, stuff erased in there. Anyway, there is more stuff in there, but I won't even be covering that today. So the only part I'm going to be covering is the very beginning part in terms of trying to define the Métis peoples, specifically that term, although I will be touching on some of the other terms. Of course, one of the ways you do that, and one of the standard principles of constitutional interpretation is, you don't just look at a term in isolation. You have to try to ensure that it's harmonious with the other terms in the statute and its overall scheme, and of course the intentions of the drafters. And of course we have Harry Daniels here, who is one of the drafters of the definition section in Section 35. So what was the intention of the drafters? Of course, that's one of the things we look at to try to define a term in the Constitution. We know that one of the ideas was that if we expressly include the term Métis, this will prevent the risk of subsequent interpretation of the provision. If it's only had Aboriginal in there, it would ensure that we don't risk not being included with the term within the meaning of Aboriginal. So that was very important to make that clarification that Métis are an Aboriginal persons, because there was, of course, and there continue to be, those critics of Métis who deny that we are Aboriginal in the first place. And that was an important, I think, provision to clarify that. A couple of things about the constitutional talks in trying to get at the meaning and the intention of the drafters. We know from the discussion that there wasn't a lot of thought put into the meaning of the term Métis. It was pretty much a last-minute endeavor during that really tight schedule on January 30th. So there's not a lot that we can get from that in terms of its meaning. We could look at the 1984 attempt by the Métis National Council to define Métis narrowly as the historic Métis of the Northwest, but we know that proposal didn't succeed. Part of it had to do with the objections of the constituency of the NCC. But what does that say in terms of giving us a clue of the term Métis? Does the fact that there was a failure to define it in reference to the historic Métis mean then, by implication, that it should be a broad definition? Of course, one could argue that, but that's a very risky argument, because we all know that a lot of factors go into drafting statutes and the Constitution in particular, and we can't rely heavily on that kind of a implication type argument. We could also look at the fact that the Métis National Accord had a narrow definition of Métis, that was specific to the historic Métis of the Northwest, and that had the support of the First Ministers, and that maybe that's a clue as to how the term Métis peoples in the Constitution should be interpreted. Unfortunately, the whole Charlottetown Accord failed, and so did the Métis Nation sub-accord. So I'm not sure if, at the end of the day, we have any idea from looking at the intentions of the drafters just what was meant by the term Métis peoples in the Constitution. No general consensus emerged from the record that I'm aware of as to how we should interpret the term, either narrowly or broadly.